This is Pianotek's latest tool from Spurlock Specialty Tools. This is the hammer tail arcing jig, and it comes with two parts. The base that you would clamp to your disc sander, or can be used with a belt sander. It also comes with the fixture for holding either a hammer with the shank if you've already hung them, or if you're arcing your tails before installing them on the shanks, you can use an appropriate sized drill bit and have that go into the hammer and tighten down with a clamp. Do it that way. We're going to demonstrate it with the hammers already hung on the shanks. And the first thing you need to do is to determine how far in the jig will push the hammer. And if you look underneath, you'll see there's a screw adjustment, and that end of that is the stop, and it pivots on a pin here. Okay, so the way we'll do this, what we found is when we set this up a number of times, that we found a distance that the edge of the base works from the sanding belt or disc. And we just made up a little piece of plastic. You could use a wooden shim, and it just helps us, because we use this disc for a sander for other operations. We just put that in there, shove the base against it, tighten down 2 C-clamps, and that gives us a start point. There's also a screw. This is primarily used to fix a drill bit on there, so that you can kind of keep the drill bit in there and you'll just be putting hammers on and arcing them. But in the case of a pre-hung set that you want to arc the tails, you're going to back this off a little. There's also, if you notice, there's a little Allen screw here that you adjust from the bottom, and that comes up and is used when you've already tapered the sides on the Spurlock tail tapering jig that we have. And if they're already tapered, you'll need the set screw adjusted so that the hammer sits even on the base. And we'll check that. Now, what we usually do when you're checking how far in you want and you're checking the arc, you want to take something like the first tenor hammer, something that's angled, and you would also want to check a base hammer, for instance the last base, because they're close to one another, and that's the most extreme angle. If your arcing works on the most extreme angles in the set, then it will also work on something like a straight hammer with no angle. So it's the extreme angles that we want to check first. We'll do the last base and first tenor. So here's the first tenor. We're going to put this in the fixture. Again, we don't need this clamp. We've adjusted this screw with a Phillips screwdriver, and that is just to turn this screw so that when you put this in, and you have to, depending on the coving on a hammer, or how high and low and how deep the cove is, you just adjust that screw so that it becomes a point that stops the hammer. Okay, so we've got that set. Now you can see this large hole just helps you. I should look around this side. The large hole here, you just roughly put it over the dowel, and that gives you a start. You slide down, and I'm hitting the end of this screw, which is adjustable. So I want to start with this, not going too far. In this case, we can almost, there's a scoring, so I'm hitting kind of the edge, but I'm not hitting the dowel. You really want to come and hit and sand at the end of the shank. So I can see by looking down that I'm really not hitting this end of the shank. So hitting a little on the tail is okay. So I might leave this as a first pass, turn the sander on, and test it. Obviously, if I want, as I want to go in, I want to go incremental. I will turn this screw, and again, to get a better shot of it, this screw adjusts, so I'll go in half turns. I'll back this out, which lets me go in deeper in the arcing. So once that's set, usually a nice way to hold this is pulling back a little on the knuckle, which kind of sets the tail against the screw stop, and thumb placed here and holding the hammer here, and usually that's enough. And you can see you will arc, and there's a point here where obviously you're in this circle here, but that lets you capture it, go in here, and arc. So you'll test those two hammers once you're assured that this adjustment, the stop, is where you want it. On the extreme angled hammers, you should be good for the whole set. So the next thing we're going to do is turn the motor on and try this sample setting. Okay, we just did our first test arc on a hammer that had the most angle in the set. As you could see, I was kind of incrementally taking away on the tail. But when we look at this, you can see maybe a little different sheen. We almost really took out trimmed the shank flush. There's a little line here, which on a heavy angled hammer you may have the more, where this area from here down has been tapered. And the main reason we're doing this on the two different bass tenor is we're looking at the thickness of the bottom of the tail and kind of judging that. Obviously, we don't want something where there's a point on one end too thin, could break, whatever, too thin. So this is pretty thick here. So we could go a little bit further and it would let us shape a little bit higher. So to do that, demonstrate that, all we're going to do is we want this to go in further, so we're going to back this out, and I'm just going to back this 1/2 turn, and we'll try it again. Okay, this is looking good. It's still plenty of meat on the edge where you've taken the most, and you're getting this much on the other side, and you're coming up, as you can see, you may not be able to see, but there's still a little line here, but when you feel the end of the shank, it's smooth. There's a little line that which you would expect. You're getting a nice curve and plenty of meat here. So this would be a good setup. We've done it on the bass, last bass, first tenor. Now, as an example, we can test it on a straight hammer. So again, put that in, same setup, turn this on, and should be looking good. And you can see we've got a nice, about the same thickness on that side as we did on the tenor hammer that had quite a bit of angle. So this is looking nice. It also comes all the way above the shank, and it's a very smooth arced hammer, ready to go. Now, if you prefer, if somebody wants to have a checkering done, we can do it. You could take them individually with the checkering file and put a heavier grooves in there. But this is basically set. We did the last bass, first tenor, a straight hammer, and you just go ahead and do the rest of the set.